I now call the Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honourable Ed Miliband.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Chancellor spoke for nearly an hour, but he did not mention one central fact. The working...
I think the Deputy Chief Whip knows better, and I hope he'll calm down a little bit more. We've not even got started, so I hope we don't hear him more. Ed Miliband.
The Chancellor spoke for nearly an hour, but he did not mention one central fact. The working people of Britain are worse off under the Tories. Living standards down, month after month, year after year. 2011, living standards down. 2012, living standards down. 2013, living standards down. And since the election, working people's living standards, £1,600 a year down. You're worse off under the Tories. Their 2010 manifesto promised. Their 2000...
I'll be quite honest with you, I thought the House was doing really well today. There was courtesy quite rightly given to the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I expect the same courtesy to be given to the Leader of the Opposition. I want to hear it. Your constituents want to hear it. Right Honourable Ed Miliband.
Talk about people's falling living standards around this country, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Their 2010 manifesto promised, and I quote, an economy where people's standard of living rises steadily and sustainably. But they have delivered exactly the opposite. Standards of living not rising steadily and sustainably, but falling sharply and steeply. And today the Chancellor simply reminded people of the gap between his rhetoric and the reality of people's lives. Living standards falling for 44 out of 45 months under this Prime Minister, unmatched since records began. No amount of smoke and mirrors can hide it. And we already know the answer to the question millions of people will be asking in 2015. Are they better off now than they were 5 years ago? The answer is no. Worse off, much worse off under the Tories. And the Chancellor trumpeted the tax allowance today. But what he didn't tell you is it's the same old Tory trick. He didn't tell you the rest of the story. He didn't mention the 24 tax rises introduced since he became Chancellor. He forgot to mention, he put up VAT, he taxed away child benefit, he raised insurance tax and gave us the granny tax. It's a classic Tory con. Give with one hand and take far more away with the other. Same old Tories. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Chancellor painted a picture of the country today that millions of people simply will not recognise. Because this is Cameron's Britain 2014. 350,000 people going to food banks. 400,000 disabled people paying the bedroom tax. 1 million more people paying 40p tax. 4.6 million families facing cuts to tax credits. But there is one group who are better off, much better off. We all know who they are. The Chancellor's chums, the Prime Minister's friends. The Prime Minister rolls his eyes. He doesn't want to talk about the millionaires' tax cut. No mention of it in the budget speech. The beneficiaries of this year's millionaires' tax cut. Because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if you're a city banker earning £5 million and you're feeling the squeeze, don't worry, because they feel your pain. Because this year, that city banker was given a tax cut, not just any tax cut, £664 a day, £20,000 a month, a tax cut worth more than £200,000 a year. So the Prime Minister chooses to afford a tax cut worth £200,000 a year for that banker, but he can't afford a pay rise of £250 a year for a nurse. And these are the people who have the nerve to tell us we're all in this together. It's Tory values, it's Tory choices, it's same old Tories. And of course, the leader of the Liberal Democrats with them every step of the way. Day after day, he claims he doesn't support Tory policy, but day after day, he votes for Tory policy. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to listen to the Chancellor today, for a recovery that arrived 3 years later than he promised, he expects the country to be grateful. He expects the country to be grateful. Back in 2010, he told us that at the end of 2014, the economy would have grown by nearly 12%. Today, the figures say it's been barely half that, and he wants the country to be grateful. Back in 2010, he said the government would clear the deficit, this Parliament, by 2014-15. Today, he wants the country to be grateful because he says he can do it by 2018-19. And 3 years ago, the Chancellor told us in his 2011 budget speech he would deliver an economy, and I quote, carried aloft by the march of the makers. But what has actually happened? What has actually happened since then to the rebalancing that he promised? Manufacturing output has fallen by 1.3%. Construction output has fallen by 4.2%. Infrastructure investment down by 11%. Every time he comes to this House and he promises a rebalancing, and every time he fails. And he talked about housing today. But what has he actually delivered? They've overseen the lowest house building since the 1920s. And rents have risen twice as fast as wages. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, at the heart of the argument we will have over the next 14 months is this quick question. Whose recovery is it under the Tories? Under them, it's a recovery for the few, not the many. Bankers' pay in London rising 5 times faster than the pay of the average worker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this recovery is not working for working people whose living standards are falling. It's not working for millions of women who see the gap between men and women's pay rising. It's not working for low-paid people promised by the Chancellor a
Mr. Williamson, you're in danger of exploding. It'll neither be good for you nor the chamber. Come on, let us listen.
Speaker, they don't want to talk about the low-paid workers, promised a £7 minimum wage by the Chancellor and given just 19p an hour. Under this government, it's an economy of the privileged, by the privileged, for the privileged. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, instead of today admitting the truth about what is happening in most people's lives, they want to tell them the opposite. They tell people their wages are rising when they're falling, just like they tell people their energy bills are falling when they're rising. And they tell people they're better off, but everyone knows the truth. Mr. Deputy Speaker, you can change the shape of the pound, but it doesn't matter if the pound is square, round or oval. If you're £1,600 a year worse off, you're still £1,600 a year worse off. You're worse off under the Tories. And the reason they can't deliver is because of what they believe. His global race is a race to the bottom. People forced to do 2 or even 3 jobs to make ends meet, not knowing how many hours they're going to get from one week to the next, and no idea what the future holds for their kids. Low wages, low skills, insecure work. That is how they think Britain succeeds. That, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is why they're not the solution to the cost of living crisis. They are the problem. And we needed a budget today that would have made the long-term changes our economy needs in housing, banking and energy. But they can't do it. They won't stand up to the vested interests. They won't tackle developers sitting on land, even though they can't solve the housing crisis without it. They won't force the banks to improve competition, even though small businesses say they need it. They won't stand up to the energy companies and freeze energy bills, even though the public support it. Same old Tories. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, we know what their long-term plan is. More tax cuts for the richest, while everyone else gets squeezed.
Totally getting out of hand, and we certainly won't any more pointing. The danger I'm worried about is and Milton's hearing. With the way you're shouting this over, it's not good for the chamber. No, I want to hear the rest of it in peace. I certainly don't want all the muttering and all the challenges that's running along the benches, because we'll take it more seriously if I have to get up next time. Ed Miliband.
And Mr. Deputy Speaker, we know what their long-term plan is. More tax cuts for the richest while everyone else gets squeezed. What does the Chancellor say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, about the people dragged into paying 40p tax? He says they should be happy. It's good news for them. So this is the new Osborne tax theory. If you're in the middle, paying 40p, you should be pleased to pay more. But if you're at the top, paying 50p, you should be helped to pay less. Same old Tories. It's no wonder, Mr. Deputy Speaker, even their own side think they're totally out of touch. And even now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, after all the embarrassment of the millionaires' tax cut, they won't rule out going further. Maybe today we can get the straight answer we haven't had so far. Will he rule out a further tax cut for millionaires to 40p? Just nod your head if you'll rule it out. Come on. Just nod your head. Will you rule out? Will you rule out? Come on. Or maybe the Prime Minister. Maybe the Prime Minister would like to have that. Just nod your head.
Order. Order. There may be an influence of the wolves and the pack running around. It's not in this chamber. It can be used in the zoo, but it won't be used here. Ed Miliband.
Go on, Prime Minister. It's very simple. All the Prime Minister needs to do is to nod his head if he's going to rule out cutting the 45p tax to 40p in the next Parliament. Just nod your head. Come on. There you have it, Mr. Deputy Speaker. There they go again. They won't rule it out. Doesn't it say all about them? They really do believe the way you make the rich work harder is to make them richer, and the way you make everyone else work harder is by making them poorer. And just like they paint a picture of the country that working people will not recognise, so too themselves. Now, the Prime Minister, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is an expert in rebranding. Remember the Huskies, the bike, the tree. That was before they said, cut the green crap. What is the latest rebranding from the Bullingdon Club? What is the latest rebranding? It is beyond parody. Because what does this lot now call themselves? I know he doesn't want to hear it. What does this lot now call themselves? They call themselves...
Mr. Williamson, I won't tell you again. I'm sure your roast beef is ready for you. You might be better off eating the little raw meat than certainly giving us the noise that we're getting in here. Ed Miliband.
What does this lot now call themselves? They call themselves the Workers' Party. And who, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is writing the manifesto for this Workers' Party? We have a helpful answer from one Conservative MP. There are 6 people writing the manifesto, 5 went to Eton. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, by my count, there are more Etonians writing the manifesto than there are women in the cabinet. No girls allowed. And this week we've heard it. And this week we've heard it right from the top. Here's what his former best friend. They don't like to hear it, do they, Mr. Deputy Speaker? Here's what his best friend.
If there's some non-rule members, Mr. Freeman, if you wish to go outside and show people, by all means, I certainly don't need you to be holding up papers all the way through. Quite seriously, the respect is due to the Leader of the Opposition in the same way that it was given to the Chancellors. I want to hear it. I'm sure if you do not, there is the door. Please leave. Ed Miliband.
Here's what his former best friend, his closest ally, the Education Secretary, had to say about the Prime Minister's inner circle. He said it was, and I quote, ridiculous, preposterous, unlike anywhere else in the world. Mr. Deputy Speaker, you know you're in trouble when even the Education Secretary calls you a bunch of out-of-touch elitists. And where is the Education Secretary? I think he's been banished. He's hiding. The Education Secretary's been hiding. I think, Mr. Deputy Speaker, he's been consigned to the naughty step by the Prime Minister. I think it's time we listen to Baroness Varsi. And took the whole Eton mess out of Downing Street. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we don't need a party for the privileged few, we need a party for the many. That is why a Labour government will freeze energy bills, guarantee jobs for unemployed young people, cut business rates, reform the banks, get 200,000 homes built a year, and abolish the bedroom tax. This is the budget that confirms people are worse off under the Tories. A worse off budget from an out-of-touch chancellor. Britain can do better than them. Britain needs a Labour government.